She was already seated. Seatbelt fastened, bag stored, eyes closed. And then a hand tapped her shoulder, not gently, not politely, but with the kind of impatience that made every head in the cabin slowly turn. The flight attendant stood over her, arms crossed, lips tight, voice just loud enough for 2 rows to hear. "Ma'am, I need you to move." The woman opened her eyes slowly, the way someone does when they are absolutely certain they heard correctly, but choosing to give the world one final chance to be decent. She didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked up and said, "Why?" And that one word, calm, quiet, unshakable, was the beginning of something no one on that flight was ready for. If you're new here, welcome to EchoStory, where every story hits different and every ending will leave you speechless. Before we go any further, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed, this one is for you. Hit that like button right now, subscribe if you haven't, and turn on notifications because stories like this one don't come around every day. Now, back to the plane. The woman's name was Renee Carter, 44 years old, window seat, row 7, first class. She had boarded early, settled in with a quiet grace that drew no attention, and had been perfectly still for 20 minutes before that hand landed on her shoulder. She was not causing trouble. She had not said a word to anyone. And yet here was this flight attendant, standing over her like she'd done something wrong. The flight attendant's name tag read Dana. She was young, maybe 26, with a practiced, professional smile that had gone completely missing in this moment. She gestured toward the back of the plane, toward economy, toward the rows where the seats were narrower and the armrests were shared. "There's been a seating adjustment," Dana said. "We need this row for another passenger." Renee looked at her boarding pass. "Seat 7 at first class? Booked 6 weeks ago." She had not been bumped, had not been notified, and had received no explanation before this moment. She held the boarding pass up, not aggressively, just clearly. "I have a confirmed ticket for this seat," she said. Dana barely glanced at it. "I understand that, ma'am, but we're going to need you to relocate." The cabin had gone very, very quiet. The whispers started slowly, the way a tide comes in, barely noticeable at first, then impossible to ignore. A businessman in 7C shifted in his seat and looked away. A woman across the aisle pretended to adjust her reading glasses. An older couple in row 8 exchanged a glance that said everything without a single word. Nobody spoke up. Nobody asked why. They just watched, the way people watch when they're relieved it isn't them and uncomfortable that it's her. Renee felt every single one of those stares. She was not a woman who cried easily, but she felt the weight of the moment pressing against her chest like a hand trying to push her down. She breathed, slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth. She had been here before, not on this plane, but in this feeling. And she knew exactly how to carry it. Dana was not backing down. If anything, the stillness of the cabin seemed to give her more confidence, as if the silence of the other passengers was somehow permission. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you one more time," she said, her voice taking on that thin, clipped authority that comes not from power but from a uniform. "If you don't move voluntarily, I will have to involve the captain." Renee placed her hands flat on her armrests and looked at Dana with the steadiest eyes that woman had ever seen. "Then involve the captain," Renee said quietly. "Because I am not moving from a seat I paid for without a valid reason, and seating adjustment is not a valid reason." Dana blinked. Something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, or the first shadow of doubt. But it passed. She turned and walked toward the cockpit, and everyone in first class held their breath. 2 minutes passed, then 5. Renee didn't fidget. She didn't pull out her phone to vent. She didn't look around for sympathy or allies. She sat exactly as she had been sitting, back straight, hands still, face composed, while the rest of the cabin buzzed with low, uncomfortable energy. A young woman in 6B leaned slightly toward her travel companion and whispered something. The man in 7C opened and closed his laptop 3 times without looking at the screen. Even the air in the cabin felt different now, tighter somehow, Like everyone was holding a breath they weren't sure how to release. Then the cockpit door opened. A tall man in a captain's uniform walked out, Dana 2 steps behind him. He had the careful expression of someone who had been told one version of a story and was now about to hear another. He stopped at row 7. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Captain Holloway. Can you tell me what's going on?" Renee looked at Captain Holloway and did something that surprised every person watching. She smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a pleading one. A calm, almost knowing smile, like a woman who has played this game before and already knows where the board ends. "Captain," she said, "I boarded this aircraft at the scheduled time. Took my assigned seat -7 first class. Confirmed, and was then approached by your crew member and asked to move to economy without explanation, without notice, and without any legitimate reason that has been given to me." She paused. "I would simply like to know the real reason I'm being asked to move." Holloway turned to Dana. Dana opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "There was a VIP passenger request for this row." Renee tilted her head just slightly. "A VIP," she repeated. The word hung in the air like smoke, and something about the way she said it made the captain's eyes narrow just a fraction. The VIP in question was a man, now standing at the front of the first-class cabin with his arms folded, an impatient energy rolling off him like heat. He was well-dressed, expensive watch, pressed collar, and wore the expression of a man who was used to getting what he asked for before he finished asking. He hadn't spoken directly to Renee. He had simply told Dana he wanted that window seat, and Dana, for reasons that no one had questioned yet, had decided that asking this woman to move was easier than saying no to him. That was the thing about bias. It didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just quietly decided whose comfort mattered more. And right now, standing in the aisle of a plane with a captain watching and a cabin listening, that quiet decision was becoming very, very loud. But what no one on that flight knew yet, not Dana, not the VIP, not the captain, was exactly who Renee Carter was. And that was about to change everything. Captain Holloway asked Dana to step aside and spoke to Renee directly, his voice lower now, more measured. He confirmed that her ticket was valid, her seat was assigned, and that no official rebooking had been processed. He looked at Dana with an expression that was professionally neutral, but communicating something much sharper underneath. Dana crossed her arms and said, quietly enough that only the front rows could hear, she was being difficult, that word. Difficult. It landed on Renee like a stone. She had not raised her voice. She had not made a scene. She had answered every question calmly, clearly, and with evidence in her hand. And she was difficult. The man who had demanded the seat without explanation, who had sent a crew member to displace a paying passenger, he was, presumably, just a valued customer with a preference. Renee looked at the captain. "I would like that statement noted," she said. "Every word of it." And something in her tone made Holloway go very still. It was at that moment, quiet, unremarkable from the outside, that Renee reached into the bag tucked beneath the seat in front of her. She pulled out a slim leather portfolio. Not a laptop. Not a phone. A portfolio. She opened it once, glanced at something inside, then closed it and set it on her lap. She didn't show it to anyone. She didn't wave it around. She simply looked at Captain Holloway and said, "I think it's time I told you why I'm on this flight." The cabin, somehow, got even quieter. Dana froze near the galley. The man in the expensive watch stopped fidgeting. Even the low hum of the aircraft seemed to pull back, as if the plane itself was listening. "My name is Renee Carter," she said. And then she said 4 more words that detonated like something slow and inevitable and absolutely devastating. "I own this airline." The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't just fill a room, it restructures it. Captain Holloway stared at her. His jaw did not drop because he was a professional, but the color in his face made a very quiet exit. Dana, standing near the galley, had gone completely still, her hand resting on the edge of the counter as if she needed something to hold on to. The man with the expensive watch, the VIP, the reason for all of this, slowly uncrossed his arms. Renee did not raise her voice. She did not repeat herself. She didn't need to. She simply opened the portfolio, removed a single card, and held it out to Captain Holloway. He took it. Read it. And the way his eyes moved across that card, slowly, carefully, twice, told everyone watching that every word on it was real. Renee Carter, Executive Chairwoman, Apex Airways Holdings, the airline whose logo was printed on every headrest in that cabin. What happened in the next 60 seconds was something that the passengers in first class would describe for years afterward at dinner parties. In airport lounges, in texts to friends who weren't there. Captain Holloway straightened. He handed the card back to Renee with both hands, not one, both, and said, "Miss Carter, I sincerely apologize for this experience." His voice had changed completely. The careful professionalism was still there, but underneath it now was something else, the particular register of a man who understands that a mistake has been made, and that the consequences of it are entirely beyond his control. Dana had not moved from the galley. She was looking at Renee the way you look at a situation when you realize you have fundamentally, catastrophically misread it. And the man in the expensive watch, the VIP who had said all of this in motion, had sat down in the nearest available seat and was staring at the back of the headrest in front of him like it contained the answers to questions he hadn't known to ask. Renee accepted the captain's apology with a single, gracious nod. She did not perform victory. She did not look around the cabin to collect the stares now aimed at her, and there were many, all of them recalibrated, all of them carrying the quiet weight of reconsideration. She had been invisible to these people 10 minutes ago. Now they were seeing her, and the discomfort of that shift belonged entirely to them. She had nothing to prove and no performance to give. She had simply told the truth when it became necessary, and the truth had done what it always does, rearranged everything. But this story was not over. Because Renee Carter had not boarded this flight by accident. She had not chosen seat 7A on a whim. She was on this plane for a specific reason, one that none of the crew, none of the passengers, and certainly not Dana had any idea about. And the reason was about to make everything that had already happened feel like a prelude. Here at EchoStory, we tell stories about moments that change people, and this was one of those moments. But what most viewers don't realize yet is that this flight was not a regular flight for Renee Carter. It was an audit, an unannounced in-person, incognito service review of Apex Airways' first-class customer experience, something Renee did personally, twice a year without telling anyone. No executive escort, no special treatment. Just a boarding pass, a window seat, and a notebook. She had done it for 11 years. She had seen the best her airline could offer and the worst. She had personally retrained departments, restructured protocols, and in 2 previous cases, made staffing changes that the board called drastic and that Renee called necessary. Today's flight had now given her more material than any audit in the past decade. And every detail, every word, every look, every moment of silence from passengers who watched and said nothing had been recorded in that leather portfolio on her lap. Dana was asked to come to the front of the cabin. Captain Holloway spoke to her in the galley, behind the curtain, in a voice low enough not to carry. But the body language carried just fine. Dana emerged 2 minutes later with the careful, rigid posture of someone holding themselves together through sheer effort. She walked to row 7. She stopped. She looked at Renee, really looked at her, maybe for the first time, and said, "Miss Carter, I owe you an apology. What I did was wrong, and I don't have an excuse." She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just said the words and stood in them. Renee studied her for a long moment, the same calm, steady gaze she'd held through the entire ordeal. Then she said, "I appreciate that. Nothing more. No absolution. No cruelty. Just the quiet acknowledgement of a woman who understood that accountability has weight. And that weight should be felt." The man in the expensive watch, whose name turned out to be Gerald Fitch, a regional sales director for a logistics company, had been sitting in his commandeered seat trying very hard to be invisible. It wasn't working. A flight attendant approached him and quietly informed him that he would need to return to his originally ticketed seat. He stood without a word, gathered his jacket, and walked past row 7 without making eye contact. But as he passed, Renee looked up. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The look was enough, not hostile, not triumphant, just clear. The look of a woman who had watched someone decide her comfort was negotiable, and wanted him to carry that knowledge for the rest of the flight, and perhaps a little longer than that. Gerald Fitch moved to his seat in row 14. He did not recline it for the rest of the journey. The atmosphere in first class had transformed entirely. The businessman in 7C, who had looked away at the beginning, ordered a drink and then sat with it untouched for 20 minutes, staring at nothing. The woman who had adjusted her glasses leaned over and said softly, "I should have said something earlier." "I'm sorry." She was speaking to Renee, who looked at her with something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't entirely its opposite either. "Most people don't," Renee said. "That's the part that needs to change." The woman nodded and looked down. It was one of those moments that doesn't resolve anything but plants something, a seed, maybe, of the particular discomfort that eventually grows into action. The cabin was quieter now, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Before, it had been the silence of avoidance. Now it was something heavier. The silence of people sitting inside a lesson they hadn't expected to receive today. When the plane landed and the seatbelt sign clicked off, something unusual happened. Nobody rushed. In a first-class cabin, there's almost always a choreography of immediate motion, overhead bins opening, laptops snapping shut, the competitive shuffle toward the exit. But this time, people moved slowly, carefully, as if the air around them had changed density. A few passengers glanced at Renee as they passed. One man paused and said simply, "You handled that beautifully." She thanked him. A young woman near the back of first class, early 20s, had been watching the entire thing from her seat without speaking, stopped at row 7 and said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Renee looked at her and felt something shift behind her ribs, warm and quiet. "You already are," she said. "You just have to decide to show it." The young woman held that for a moment, then walked off the plane with her head a few degrees higher than when she'd boarded, 3 days after the flight. Dana received a certified letter from Apex Airways Human Resources Department. It was not a termination notice. Renee had specifically noted in her audit report that the incident, while serious, appeared to stem from a lack of training and unconscious bias rather than malicious intent, and she had recommended a structured retraining program rather than dismissal. She had also recommended that the program be applied airline-wide. Not just to Dana, Gerald Fitch's company, which held a small corporate travel contract with Apex Airways, received a formal review notification, and the passenger in 6B, who had whispered something to her companion during the confrontation, wrote a letter to EchoStory describing what she had witnessed. She said she had been ashamed of herself for not speaking up. She said she had thought about it every day since. She said she hoped her letter would reach the woman on the plane. It did. Renee Carter still flies incognito twice a year. She still books window seats. She still boards early and settles in with a quiet grace that draws no attention. The leather portfolio goes under the seat in front of her, and the notebook inside it fills slowly with observations, some disappointing, some extraordinary, and occasionally, something that makes her believe, fully and without reservation, that people are capable of becoming better than they currently are. She never talks about the flight publicly. She never sought the attention. But the story found its way here to EchoStory because that's what real stories do. They refuse to stay quiet. They travel, they land somewhere unexpected and rearrange the room. And if this story rearranged something in you, if it made you think about a moment when you looked away, or a moment when you wish you hadn't, then carry that. Because respect isn't something you show when someone is powerful. It's something you show when you think they're not. That's where your character actually lives.